Again, thank you for tuning in to the planning board meeting. We'll give 1 second for Will to, let's see. Michelle's sort of there. Will, are you actually there? We're still connecting, maybe. All right, we'll get started. They'll be tuning in soon. Okay, so again, thank you all for coming here. What as I wanted to say, and I mentioned in the email that went out, so public is here, would love to hear from you. We have a privilege of the floor period right now. We have a lot of material to get through in the agenda, so I am going to restrict the public participation to the privilege of the floor. Sometimes we can be a little bit more informal, and it's also easier for me in person. I have to tell you that sometimes with the Zoom stuff, it's really hard to do the more interactive back and forth stuff. But what I will also say is, I know there used to be time when you could buttonhole people as they walked out to their car at the town hall. So I will give the equivalent of that. I'm happy to hang out for 10 or 15 minutes after the meeting is formally over, if there's anyone in the public who wishes to chat further about any of the business that came up tonight. So with that, is there anyone who would like to address the planning board as part of privilege of the floor? And you can raise your Zoom hand if so, or wave at me if you have your video on. Okay, so not seeing that, I think we're gonna go ahead and start. First item is a modification in the agenda. Those who saw the agenda in the town announcement, the first item was supposed to be a few items of follow-up from our previous meeting. Those have been superseded sort of by events. The first is the code officer has been heavily involved in some training program this week. So he promises to get information back to me next week about off-grid solar systems, but there's nothing to report there. And the other was, I was planning to reach out to Guy Crow about how to capture additional technologies that might develop in the future. In the end, as you'll see when we get into the law, I tried to write definitions in a way that would capture other things. And we can get his advice down the road, but I thought rather than incurring too many legal bills right now, that we'll try this and see what the planning board thinks. So I'm striking that item on the agenda, but in the meantime, Catherine Goldberg Forrest has been appointed, demoted from the planning board to be onto the town board. And so that and actions the town board has taken regarding the zoning commission, I think this deserve a little discussion. So Tim, since you're here, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's been happening from the town board and in terms of the zoning commission interaction with the planning board, Catherine's appointment, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so hey everybody. So last night at the board meeting, we rearranged some board committee liaison assignments in relationship to all the shifting, and it made sense for Catherine to stay with the planning board. So she's going to be the board liaison to the planning board. I'm going to shift over to the zoning commission to be the board liaison to the zoning commission. So I'll see some of you there. We did have a discussion, a brief discussion last night, partially, I guess she's not here yet, partially encouraged by Catherine, who was wondering how the board and or the planning board could interact more forcefully with the public to talk about zoning. Our feeling, especially my feeling, is that is best left to the zoning commission, which is being set up for that purpose, and that the justification, of course, to have the zoning commission turns back to the comprehensive plan, which we spent the fall discussing in public in passing. And we've talked about that a little bit more back channel today as well. And my own feeling still is that I think it makes much more sense procedurally and also just communicationally to pass that baton to the zoning board, let them decide how they want to communicate with the public. That's part of their charge. I mean, my anticipation is they'll probably end up doing something like the planning board did for the comp plan, which is probably have a couple of public information sessions before carrying on, but they themselves don't know what they have to do investigative work first in order to even understand what zoning would mean for Caroline. So it's kind of, I think, premature to do any public reporting about that. But that's just in a nutshell what at least what we considered. And we have made a public announcement for applications for the zoning commission. We're hoping to interview candidates for that outside of the board candidates, outside of the planning board participants. 4 candidates for that at our agenda meeting the first Tuesday of March. So probably the zoning commission isn't going to, practically get into play until sometime in March. And at that time also we'll hire we'll try to hire a planner as well. Don't know exactly what the sequence is going to be for that. Probably we'll want the commission to have some discussions about where they think they'll be going before we seek a planner, so that we're not just floundering around or being led by some kind of broad planning scheme. But that's kind of it in the nutshell where that all stands. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. The only other additional information. So I believe in the end, what you guys passed for the composition of the zoning commission was indeed to have 3 members from the planning board. Is that right?
Seven members total.
Okay, so 3 + 4.
Without the board liaison and without the planner. Yeah. So
Okay.
it'll be basically the same size as the task force was this fall. Once it whittled down a little bit very soon on.
Okay.
And that ended up, we thought, was a really efficient size for working. Oh, there's Catherine. Good.
Yeah. So is the assumption that we will, amongst ourselves, choose the 3? Did the town board have a thought of, working on choosing the 3? Or do I basically get out a revolver and whoever can duck fast enough?
How about a harpoon?
Yeah. No, so is it totally up to us which 3 members from the planning board wind up on the zoning commission is really the question I'm asking.
Mark? I would think so. Mark?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess,
It's actually not something we discussed.
yeah, we hadn't discussed it, or, I mean,
Hi,
Yeah.
Catherine. Did you hear that question?
I did, yeah. Sorry, so sorry.
Catch your breath.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess my suggestion would be that, maybe, I mean, I sort of feel like maybe you could discuss it and then, we could discuss it with you and come up with a team.
We did discuss the procedure. We think it's best for the board to select a chair for the zoning commission, since some are going to be appointed, some are from the planning board, and also we'll be able to have a good idea of hopefully an efficient chair. But
Okay.
that's the only.
Great.
So hopefully this will all get rolling and it'll be efficient and.
All right. So you guys are going to make your assignments presumably after that agenda meeting in March. So basically on that same time schedule, we should know which planning board members are going to serve in the zoning commission.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, we'll have to see, of course, if we get what applications come in. It may well be that in March we won't be ready to, at the agenda meeting, it could be that we won't be ready to fill all 4 slots. We'll just have to see,
Okay.
But that's the goal.
Okay. So Catherine, what you missed was Tim gave sort of the thumbnail sketch of the board discussions last night. So I didn't know if there's anything else in particular you wanted to say, but again, yeah, Tim gave us sort of a rundown of the discussions back and forth and about public outreach and stuff like that. But I also do want to take this moment, though I'll still be seeing you, obviously, to thank you for all your service to the planning board and all your nudging and pushing and good ideas that helped get the comp plan into the shape that it was. It's been good to have you as part of that
You guys
process.
did all that. You did all that. But I'll still be around. I mean, I assume we're going to have a lot of intercommunication between the planning board and the zoning commission. So
Yes.
especially.
The same that does go for you, but I was actually speaking to Catherine at that
Oh,
moment.
that
But
was
anyway,
Catherine. I thought Catherine's still with you.
yes. But the same does go for you. But anyway,
Welcome, Catherine.
so Catherine, that's my official thank you for your work over the last couple of years. But
Well, thanks for stealing my thunder, Tim. Appreciate it.
It's the last time you'll let me get away with that.
yeah,
Thank you, Bill. No, I appreciate that very much. And you're stuck with me still, so
I know. We'll make this work somehow.
sweet.
Okay. I think we're ready to leave that behind. Though again, Catherine came in late. So I don't know if there's anything particular you wanted to say about moving forward or anything like that.
No, just sorry I'm late first. And
Okay.
yeah, thanks to everyone for everything. And I'll still be here. So, I'm sure Tim gave the summary and we'll be working all together as a team. And I'm actually bummed that town board members can't be on the zoning commission because I would really enjoy doing that. So yeah.
All right. Okay. So I'd like to move on in the agenda unless anybody else has something they want to say about the zoning commission and the process of selecting members. All right, so the next item up, before we actually get into, I think, essentially a section by section review of the proposed solar siting law. And regarding that law, by the way, I realized today, because of what someone wrote me, that there were two different versions of the law on the town website. One was linked to in a paragraph of text, and that link didn't get updated properly when the one under the key documents got updated. So if you did not read or are not looking at a draft that says at the top for those who aren't on the planning board, but it'll have a recent date on it of the 6th or so of February. But the link was under key documents on the right-hand side of the webpage. That's the correct link for that draft. But first, the first item I want to talk about, so we had some discussions via email over agricultural land and definitions, and in particular, a lot of work on the definition of farmland of statewide importance. And the actual definition of that may wind up being moot pending some other decisions. And this is the key one, which is, do we try to include farmland of statewide significance, capture that under land that is paid attention to particularly carefully when siting solar arrays. So I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to pop up the map of land. So let me see if I can do this relatively smoothly. All right, so you guys should be seeing a map of Caroline with swirly colors on it.
Yep.
All right, so the darker color here is the prime farmland, no surprise, in the valleys a lot. And then there's a little bit out here along Old 76. And that'd be in Shindagan there, so that's not so relevant. And then this is my own valley here along Coddington. Then the lighter brown is farmland of statewide importance. And as you can see, it is very extensive. And the town of Ithaca, as we read, had this dilemma of, on the one hand, siting renewable energy facilities is a positive thing that we want to try to be able to do. On the other hand, we want to protect farmland. And on the third hand, there's an awful lot of that. And is it really all worthy of the same level of protection? So I'm just throwing it there. And I think that it's time to discuss whether we want to include this lighter sort of colored regions in land that would, for example, need to follow the Ag and Markets guidelines when construction occurs in agricultural areas. I'm going to give a foreshadow that in the law that we're going to look at in a minute, I have several definitions of agriculturally sort of important or sensitive areas. And one of them uses language that the Ag and Markets uses, which is agricultural land. And that basically means land that is being used for farming, whether or not it's necessarily prime or not. That's what they deemed worthy of protection. So anyway, that's the question, is whether or not we include farmland of statewide importance and to what extent we do. And I'm not going to see everybody. So planning board members, you are able to talk and unmute yourselves if you're muted. And I can't see someone waving because I can't get to everybody at one time here. So I think go ahead and speak as well. I'm sharing my screen, unless people want me to stop sharing the screen, then I can, if people have seen this enough.
Well, I understand that the farmland of statewide importance is largely the forest land for the sake of forestry and those sorts of things, right? I mean, so in a way, we're dealing with different types of farmland, whether it's, you know, I mean, in terms of scale, in terms of crop output, and those sorts of things, right?
I don't know that's necessarily true, and Will looked into this, so maybe she can contribute. But my understanding is that it's not necessarily forest, because that's not the crop they were looking at. It also includes oilseed, I mean, just general crops. So I don't think it's necessarily forest. Will, you have other stuff you want to add to that?
Yeah, I asked about it, and most of the farmland of statewide importance was being used for food crops for animals, you know, like haying, and not so much for humans. Or if it was being used for humans, was it being used for like soybeans and mustard or sunflowers? And what I got back from him, I'll read to you, was that generally speaking, these soils are considered good for cropland or pasture land because of their higher water capacity, and yes, largely to support animals, but that they also have seen that for all sorts of foods. So I don't know if that helps or not.
Okay. I mean, I think
You didn't mention forests.
Okay. And, you know, I mean, again, this is based on soil, not necessarily current land use. Clearly, all of this is Shindagan Hollow, you know, National Forest, whatever. So, you know, this is Shindagan Hollow here. So that is forested. But that is, again, what they're looking at is what's underneath the trees. It was a soil classification. All right, I'm gonna.
And to be clear, what he had said, he was talking about the county, when the county looked at the ones who thought it was more important to have land available for solar than to hold it out as farmland that shouldn't be disturbed.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing so that I can see all of you at one time. All right. Oh, nice to see all your faces again. So we can definitely go into this a bit more as we look at the definitions, but I do want to get any other further just initial thoughts and comments on just, you know, farmland of state importance or anything along these lines people want to say right now before we start looking at the options of definitions.
I guess this is Barb. Just thinking through the implications that I think why we're doing this is to say whether the solar energy system law would pertain, if the review process would pertain, right? I mean, that's the implication. And so I guess I am seeking to understand what the downside would be of being more inclusive, meaning I think using the definition of farmlands of statewide importance versus less inclusive, which would be the agricultural land definition, which just refers to really current use or recently fallow.
Yeah. So my suggestion of where I'd like to go with this, but this is just me, is prime farmland if drained, and anything that's currently active ag or fallow. And with the rationale that what that land gets is extra protection if solar is developed there, that they have to follow the ag and markets guidelines, in which case they aren't going to be compacting the soil, they aren't going to be mixing subsoil with topsurface soil, that kind of thing. That would be the reason. And I don't know how hard that is to do. So if we then applied that to also farmland of statewide importance, that pretty much means any solar facility that goes in would have to follow those guidelines. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if that level of effort is discouraging to solar development, we have to ask ourselves, is that a decision, do we want to do that? And I'm, I don't want to say quite agnostic, but I'm not really sure. Maybe we do. Maybe we want to say, look, that land's important too, and we should make sure they follow all those guidelines anywhere in the town, of particularly the ag and markets guidelines of how to preserve good farmland soil.
Right. So do we have an indication of how much of a disincentive or how much discouragement that would be to have to follow that versus not?
Good question.
I have the same question.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, I would err on the side of, wanting to have these lands available for future uses, beyond 30 years of any type, and if they're suitable, if the soils are suitable for agriculture, have that be useful. But, on the other hand, of course, as we're talking, we don't want to close out solar development. But I guess I'm just trying to understand in a realistic way how much of a burden that truly is to do those kinds of activities.
All right, I just set an ask to unmute to Cal, who is now unmuted as a farmer here. I think you might have wisdom to offer us. So what do you have to say, Cal?
Well, thank you for thinking it might be wise, but I think decommissioning is a very important thing in site planning. If there's a solar site installed on 40, 50, 60 acres, that if however technology progresses, if they just walk away from something in 10 years, that they don't just leave all this infrastructure stuck on the land. So to me, just what you are going to do with something when you are done with it is very important.
All right, point well taken,
we had an old program called the Conservation Reserve Program, which was the soil bank, it was called. It was back in the 60s. And, with the idea that, we may need this ground in the future, but we don't need it right now necessarily.
Right.
So I'm really just a strong advocate for this concept of decommissioning something that they can't walk away from things. And I don't care if it's 2 acres or 100 acres or.
All right. There is a decommissioning section of the law, so that indeed anything that's on 2.5 acres or above the parts have to be taken away when the facility is either abandoned, even if it goes bankrupt, they give money to the town up front so the town can do it if the company goes away. So does that, basically, yes, everything's supposed to go away and leave the land in as good a shape as it was when they came. Does that satisfy your concern?
Yes, and that it is not something that is bargained away.
Right. So the corollary question, though, is that when they're doing the construction, how carefully do you treat the land is sort of the current question, and whether everywhere they go, they have to be really careful to make sure they don't screw the land up for future farming, or only in our best soils.
Yeah, it seems that as I see things that they want to do now, what wouldn't be incredibly disruptive. When I think of solar sites or even windmill things, it would just be the disruption to the soil as a large area. It seems like wouldn't be huge. At least that's my perception right now. They drilled some holes to put in some solar sites to put in their poles to support solar panels, or even in wind, it's just a huge, like the cell tower up on Taft Road, or cell tower, emergency communications tower, I think is appropriate. There's just a huge foundation that's put down in the soil quite a ways to support a certain structure. There's access roads, but I don't think that's incredibly disruptive to, say there's a 50 or 60 acre field, it probably disrupts less than 5%.
All right. Do you have any insight on the question of, again, the ag markets guidelines? I can't remember. Again, they had to do with taking extra care, again, to segregate topsoil from subsoil when you're doing, whatever excavation work, so you can restore that and that kind of stuff. So I think I have them up here somewhere, but the question is, how hard is it to actually do those? That was Barb's question. I think it's an excellent question, which is that a big ask?
It shouldn't be a big ask. I don't care if it is a big ask. They just got to do it.
Okay,
and
thanks.
I think it's standard procedure now. I mean, it's not like we're bringing up anything, huge for them to do. I see construction sites, and things are segregated like that. The topsoil is pushed off to one side, and they do what shaping they have to do to meet their requirements. But we've got certain guidelines that we want you to follow, and damn it, you better.
Okay, I'm going to bring this back to a planning board discussion. Thanks, Cal, for those.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else want to?
Well,
Yeah, Michelle. Okay, with Michelle, then Catherine.
All right. Well, I just think I have to agree with Cal, and I feel like these are fairly large companies. There's no reason for them to be treated delicately. They're out to make a profit. There's no reason for them to make a profit off of a small town by not adhering to the highest standards. So I have no sympathy for large companies, I guess is what I'm saying. I think they should do what they have to do. They want to make money. This is the price. Okay, it's capitalism. So anyway.
Okay, Catherine.
Well, I'm just wondering, to Cal's point, do any of us, I do not personally, but do we know what the standard procedure actually is for this? Like, because it's a little bit of conjecture right now of like, whether this is standard, whether it's not, what do they normally do? So and I don't know if this is just an easily answered question of what's the process.
I mean, I think to some extent the technology keeps changing, and my understanding is the current technology involves a lot of post pounding rather than excavation work, and so it's thought to be relatively benign. But again, if you're trenching because you want to put the power lines underground, then you have some of that. But there's also the road surface, and how much are you driving over the soil with heavy equipment while you're pounding in your posts. But let me, I think I had them up here. I'm going to share the Ag and Markets guidelines. We can just skim through them quickly. So let me just see if I can.
I guess my general question or comment is like, I agree with Cal 100%. And we don't really know, or doesn't seem like we know if this is necessary to go the Ag and Markets requirement or not, given what the standard is right now.
No, I would say we don't know for sure, except that, again, the Ag and Markets guidelines are dated October 2019, so they're not all that old, but things have changed a lot in a year and a half. But they obviously felt that was important as of a year and a half ago. And I believe that the draft of the Office of Renewable Energy siting regulations, the draft that was put out and it was commented on through December, makes a reference to those same guidelines. And says they need to be followed on agricultural land. Again, I can't remember exactly where they did it. So again, the state in regulations that they were offering for public comment as of late last fall thought it was important to include those on some lands. That's the only.
So it's not a burden. We might as well include it. But I don't even know if am I allowed to speak anymore?
Yeah. Well, as you know, so we are fairly low-key interactive, and I also expect a bit of a transition period as you shed your planning board skin and accumulate your town board skin. But the liaisons have played various roles, and we sit in your hands more often than not, perhaps. But we
duly noted.
We're fairly open and back and forth. Okay, anybody else want to say something now before, because again, that choice comes up when we look at the definitions in the law. But what I'm sort of hearing is a leaning towards going ahead and requiring it on pretty much everything, which is fine.
Yeah, I agree with that, requiring it.
Okay, all right.
I do, also, yes.
Cool.
Bill, when you say everything, do you mean small, medium, and large? Or do you mean medium and large?
Right now, it's only required of medium and large, because small, for most of those, go through the unified solar permitting process, which has no, we just said that's all you got to do. Ask the code officer to approve your permit. So that does mean something that disturbed less than 2.5 acres, as long as it was under 25 kilowatts, wouldn't have it. So. All right, I'm going to share the law now. And again, the downside of sharing screen is I don't get to see everybody. But all right, so this is the most recent draft of the law. And we'll just start at the top and go through. I think the main place we're going to be talking is probably in the definition section initially, but I do want to point out that here I struck out these first 2 sentences. Again, some of the language was still continuing from the Lansing stuff. And the reason that's now been struck out is because of the interaction between the solar siting law and the site plan law. I do not necessarily want this law to supersede site planning. In particular, I want it to work in concert with site planning. In particular, I think we need to have it use the site planning procedure, as I sort of chatted in an email. But that's why that went out, is that it wasn't, that basically there's a line later on that says whichever has the more stringent conditions applies. So I didn't want something that we had that might be a little less stringent to necessarily supersede something in the site plan law that was more stringent. And so rather than superseding, there's language later on that says the more stringent applies. And that's actually right here in the shaded section. So it's just a blanket thing that came out of the site plan law that says basically our law doesn't, can't counteract federal, state, or other local law. And if there's a conflict, whichever is more restrictive shall apply. So that was something that was in our existing site plan law. So I just copied that language over. So any comments on this preamble period, the authority section? I expect some of these sections will get changed by our town lawyer, because this again was coming out of Lansing, where they maybe were applying zoning power, which we don't have.
That paragraph sounds good.
Okay. Purpose has not been changed. It's been there all along. Applicability, this is the one change. Catherine had brought up the concern about grandfathering systems, and I didn't know if we had to explicitly put something, state that or not, or if that was just de facto anything in existence was grandfathered. But again, I saw in our site plan law there was explicit grandfathering language, so I just copied and put that in here. So it does not apply to anything that's already in existence as of the date it's passed, except basically if it's modified significantly. So if it's been discontinued for a period of 1 year or more and then restarted, the conditions of the law would apply. And they give a definition of what it means by in existence. And then later on in the law, there's a thing that says if you expand an area, then the law is going to apply. Any comments here? All right. So yes,
yeah, I had a question, because a lot of these projects do take a year or more to complete, including if you want to change. I don't know that we'll ever get one of these large projects, but sometimes it takes them a year to go through the ISO queue, or 6 months, and then and they can't make changes until then. So you could easily go beyond a year. And so I don't know if, I mean, it sounds like you're just repeating what's in the site plan review. And so it's a little confusing to me how that works, because if you give someone a permit and they have no control over all those other processes, what do they do? Just go back to the review board and say we need more time? Is that all that happens?
That's a good question, and I'll see what other people on the planning board say. Again, for me, that sort of falls in the not my problem category. I mean, they know sort of the time it takes to do all those procedures. What the law here says is that it has to be, it's substantially commenced as of the effective date of the law. And then it has indeed this additional fully constructed by 1 year from the law. A developer will have some sense of that. And if they blow it, I guess, again, to be cruel, not my problem. I mean, they conceivably could come back to the review board and say, hey, we really thought we'd be done. We're right on track. The holdup is this external agency. And perhaps there can be, some wiggle room there. But if they then have to come, I guess, basically they have to be sure they'd be done within 1 year when the law is completed, right? That they basically have to tell the planning board, the reviewer, we're sure we'll be done within 1 year, so your law doesn't apply to us. And for the reasons you say, most of them probably won't say that. But other thoughts from anybody?
But is that just meant to cover people who have already applied, or is it meant to cover people who ask for changes?
Okay, so it says substantially commenced. Okay, so this last sentence here only applies to someone who basically has started a project but isn't quite done yet. So it's not modification of an existing project. It's, I think, perhaps, but basically, I think the reason it's worded this way is to avoid someone quickly putting in a quick application. They're not really quite ready to get going yet, but they want to beat the deadline of a law going into effect. So they've thrown in an application as the town is considering the law just to get in the queue. And then maybe 2 years later, they finally get around to building it, but they aren't subject. So I think the reason the 1 year clause in there is to prevent that sort of frivolous, I'm going to put in an application, even though I don't really have much plan yet. So I think that's why it's worded this way. So I would basically say not something we have to worry about. Okay. All right. Definitions. A few of the definitions are in here still from before. And at the very end, I think someone needs to go through and make sure we haven't defined something that is not used in the law in the end, because we've taken various things out. But I think the one thing to first look at here is this section here, which we just basically talked about. And I think that what I'm hearing is clearly people want farmlands of statewide importance included in what I first called agriculturally sensitive areas. I'm going to ask the question, should we call them important areas or sensitive areas? And we may want to include in then the definition one, basically go with that, and could perhaps also include a definition of what agricultural land is, which simply means even if it's not prime if drained, or statewide importance, but someone's farming on it, that it also gets captured. So what do people think?
This is Barb. I would recommend the agriculturally important areas rather than sensitive areas as language, and I think agriculturally important is used currently within the draft that we're looking at later on in the text of it. And I think what we're saying is that the agriculturally important areas would include the farmlands of statewide importance. So that I'm not sure that any one of these options does that, because we would need to say agriculturally important, and then it would include prime farmlands and if drained, and farmlands of statewide importance.
Right. So if we change one to look like this, then these are the agriculturally important areas. And then the only question I have is, do we also include basically agricultural land, where agricultural land is defined as something being farmed, basically?
And I would suggest, based on discussions that have occurred in the Land Use and Economic Development Task Force, that would be appropriate, and also the discussions that we've had, in the sense that there has been a real interest in the town of Caroline preserving and maintaining, to the extent possible, viable, meaning, active agricultural land for, green space and, open space purposes. So if something is being used as agricultural land that isn't designated as statewide importance or whatever, it still seems like that ought to go through the kinds of review and decommissioning requirements and so on, because it is being used as agricultural land.
Okay, anybody else? And just go ahead and speak, because again, I can't see people raising their hands. I only got a view of 4 of you here. Cal Snow has raised
Cal
his
has his
hand.
hand.
Okay, all right. Now, I did say I wasn't gonna, I guess Cal's not really public, right? We'll give him special dispensation as a town board member and a farmer. So you have dual expertise here. What do you want to say,
thank
Cal?
you. Thank you. It's something very close to my heart. I would change permanent land use to perennial crops and temporary to annual, just as a linguistic thing.
Okay, so
Or
where's
as a
this
word
land under
thing.
permanent crops? I should say perennial crops.
Mhm.
Yes, and under temporary, I would just put annual.
And I probably just misspelled perennial. Yeah. And where this is temporary crops, you want that?
Annual,
Okay, annual.
things like corn or
Right,
oats or
right.
things that are planted crops. They're
Okay.
just the, the conventional lingo within the ag. And I would say permanent meadows or perennial meadows, or they're just meadows eliminate temporary meadows. It's awkward.
Mhm.
Temporarily fallow, that's appropriate.
Okay, so does this read okay to you now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It was basically lifted from like a Wikipedia definition and just a little bit of wordsmithing on my part. So glad to have your hand on that. All right. So
Can I go
Go ahead.
back to one thing about battery energy storage?
Sure.
Or not? I mean, just
Well,
the people I've
quickly.
talked to, the thing about it is I think it's just more energy storage. I mean, battery energy storage system just seems,
All right.
I don't know what it means.
All right.
I
Write
know
me.
solar energy system means something.
Okay. Write me an email on that. I'm not being facetious.
Okay.
It helps remind me to do something. So the language
Yep.
there, those phrases came from what was used in a law in Lansing. And we've actually
Okay.
that's where it came from. I eventually defined facility, like a solar energy facility, small, medium, and large, and a battery energy facility. And they are basically, they're defined later on. Because that was one way to deal with, like I
Thank
started
you,
writing
Bill.
about solar systems, and that got me a little confused also.
Yeah, I don't want to drag this out.
Okay, all right, and
I'll send you an email.
Thank you. I would really appreciate that. I was going to, here we go. So I think that this is what we are thinking about keeping. Oh, that's too dark. Let's go with that and that. Is that the one I used? Nope. I'm not good at this. All right, I don't want to take up too much time, but I just want to make sure I don't lose track of what we've decided. All right, is that what we sort of agreed, that we're going to have agriculture important areas of this, and there's a definition of ag land? Okay, if I don't hear objection, I'm going to assume that that's concurrence. Okay,
Would you still use the title of sensitive / important?
No, no. I mean, basically, we're changing to say agriculturally important areas instead. So basically, this is it, that goes away. This goes
Right.
away, and this is the definition, and that will go into the definition.
Right.
I mean, if you had mucklands or something in the town of Caroline, you might use the phrase agriculturally sensitive.
Okay, we'll just call them important.
Yeah.
All right. So at some point, again, let me just talk about a couple things in here, and then if anyone has any other questions about definitions. But I will point out that at one point, Will suggested that decommissioning plan should be decommissioning and site restoration plan, because decommissioning, taking away the parts, is a bit different than restoring the site. And I thought it was a good point. So that's the reason that language is there. So what I do want to discuss now, before backing up looking at the whole section, is we have farmlands of statewide importance to look at that definition, and some of the definitions of prime farmland and farmland prime if drained. The reason this has been struck is in part because we're now appealing to the site plan law, in which they reference the appropriate town laws. And the flood damage law was referenced in the Lansing law because that's how they define flood prone areas. We actually don't do that in our laws, so this definition was wrong to have in there. Soil erosion was more our concern. There's a separate soil erosion law, but again, since it's in the site plan law, in the end, I didn't put it in here. But let's talk about farmlands of statewide importance. We had some chit chat via email about definitions. I believe this one down here was the most succinct and would be where I would tend to fall, but I do want to hear from committee.
This is Barb. I would concur that being succinct is better, especially because we have now agreed that in the section that we just left, that we're going to have some articulation about agricultural land that's not, of prime importance and so on. And so I think if we include language about farming in this, it gets a little bit muddied up and confusing. So just relying on designation by the state, I think would be sufficient.
Anybody else?
Well, I think so. Also, all of these categories are essentially subcategories designated by the state.
Well, two are federal, which we're going to get to in a second. But yes, that's the idea. We're appealing to an outside authority as having defined them, as opposed to trying to give words that define them. Let's jump down to the other farmland stuff, and then we'll come back up here. All right, so we have these two things. So to be the similar thing, the most succinct is the final definition. So does anyone object to using the definition 3 for prime farmlands, definition 3 for prime farmlands if drained? All right, not hearing objection, we're going to take that. And that. And okay, so I'm going to back up a bit. So I have some numbers highlighted here. Battery energy stuff we have not talked about at all, really. And Will nicely volunteered to take a look at the state's NYSERDA's sample siting law. But, we've been busy, so I think that's going to happen between now and next meeting. So I would tend to suggest let's not worry about this number because they may have guidance there. But the other number we did talk about, and I just want to confirm, this is our decision, was that the division line between what we call a medium facility and a large facility is 2.5 acres. And I think that's where the committee came down. Actually, I'm quite certain that's where the committee came down last time. I guess I'm asking if there's any second thoughts, but I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not trying to argue that we have to change it. Okay,
I agree.
All right. All right. All right. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I particularly wanted to talk about, and then I'll open it up. Okay. Yes, here we go. I think that's going to be it, though. All right. So the last thing I want to make sure we talk about, and then I'll open up for general stuff. So here, 25 kilowatts, that is set because, again, that's the limit on a unified solar permit. And this would allow pretty much almost any residential system to go in without going through review board approval and having to fill out tons of forms and everything. There's a fairly simple 2-pager, 3-pager form, which I expect most of the developers are doing already, for permitting, and they're certainly very familiar with it. So that's why that's 25 kilowatts. That's not really up for, it's not seriously up for debate, because if we go higher than that, then we have to make a distinction between things that qualify and don't qualify for unified solar permit. It could be lowered. So does anyone have a problem with being as large as 25 kilowatts going without review board oversight? All right. All right. Okay. So this was my attempt. So the Lansing law very carefully, explicitly defined a solar photovoltaic system and a solar thermal system. And then I put in solar thermal power system. And then we started talking last meeting about, well, what about if there's other technologies? And so I think indeed one could get oneself in trouble by trying to over define and be too narrow in definitions. So my suggestion is that we broaden the definition of a solar energy system to be what I have here as number 3, which is basically any system that converts solar energy into electrical energy. So if there's some new technology that does that, it still gets captured by this law. Because what we really care about is the land footprint impact. And also what we mean by the system is not just the physical thing that does the conversion, but all the other stuff you have to make the site work. They call the balance of system equipment, and then any other stuff like the fact you put in telephone poles and that kind of stuff. Again, no surprisingly, that's my suggestion. It explicitly does not incorporate, but we already agreed this, something that's designed to make hot water or hot air is not captured by this law. A large system that made hot water or hot air that went above 1 acre of disturbance gets captured by the existing site plan law. And so that's my suggestion, but having made my case, I'm again going to open it up to committee discussion.
This is Barb. I like the addition of that last sentence about what the system includes. So I'm certainly in favor of that in number 3. But I would suggest that just for clarity for people who are reading this to understand that current technologies, meaning solar voltaic systems and solar thermal power systems, are included, I would suggest changing number 3 to have some additional language. So it would read like it says now, an energy system that converts solar energy into electrical energy, but then it would add such as solar photovoltaic systems, solar thermal power systems, or other technologies, period. And then the system includes blah, blah, blah.
Okay, or solar thermal or other technologies.
Yes.
Like that.
Yep.
I mean, I'll fix it.
Yeah, so it would read into electrical energy such as solar voltaic systems,
it's not
solar
really
thermal
period there.
power systems, or other technologies. Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying not to spend too much time with too much punctuation in committee, but okay, I'm happy with that. Other comments?
Well, I think that that phrase technically should go after energy system rather than after electrical energy.
That makes sense too.
Oh, fine.
Okay, and I will certainly make sure that the grammar is correct before we're all done, but that gets the idea across. Okay, if I don't hear other objection, I'm going to highlight that as something that we chose. Okay. And we don't otherwise reference solar thermal power systems in the law, but they could be kept in here, or it could be just be left uncapitalized up here, meaning it's a general idea. We do reference solar photovoltaic systems in the law because that's what unified solar permits apply to. But, you know, that detail we can work out. All right. Anything else anybody else wants to talk about in this definition section? All right, I'm gonna move on down to section 5.
I want to talk about it.
Will, I'm getting part of you. Say again.
I think I did have something, but it relates to battery systems, and I'd rather hold off
Sure.
for next time, right? Okay.
I think that's a great idea. All right, so new stuff in this general section about solar energy systems. Again, I will renumber it, so it's 5.1 and on down. But so again, from the site plan law, there is an application fee that helps cover the costs of the review board having to do its work. Some of that is copying costs and potentially hiring, doing other stuff. So I added a similar phrase here, and that fee is set by town board resolution. So the fee is not in the law itself, because of course that would require a public hearing to totally change with the fee. So setting the fee by resolution allows the town board to update it, depending on inflation or whatever. So I here split the fee into two pieces. One was for the application, and the other is what I call a monitoring fee, because it was all one fee for the site plan review law. But it seemed to me that if you're putting in a 50-acre solar field, that the monitoring fee might be a bigger part than if you're doing a 2-acre solar field. So I thought it might be sensible to have them separated out. And it could be that the town board sets the same fee for general site plan review and solar review, or they might decide to set a different fee for the medium versus the large. It's totally up to them. So that's why that's in there. Other things of note.
Can we comment? Can we
yeah.
comment on that one on 5.0?
Absolutely. We can go through piece by piece. That's totally fine.
So on that one, I agree with the two fees, but I'd suggest make it even more clear that there's two fees. And Val can comment on whether this clause is in the right place or not. But I would suggest where it says periodically set a fee schedule for, add an application fee for the review and processing. And that's the kind of similar structure, and a monitoring fee. So you're actually calling out that there is something called an application fee and something called a monitoring fee.
I'm happy with that. Fee 4. Oh, I love parallelism also. If you hadn't caught that in me yet, that's anybody else have a thought on that one? Okay, looks good. So this was the thing we've talked about before, that basically this is, again, just language that came through from Lansing. We really haven't touched this one. And I think it's fine. Basically, it's saying that basically, yeah, you can go in there and repair your stuff without triggering site plan review or another review. However, and this is now our however, if in modifying it or otherwise you decide to expand the facility such that it changes class, so we have one set of regulations for what we call like the medium scale and the other two are the large scale, that triggers an automatic review if you're going to go to a different class, because we have certain things required of facilities above 2.5 acres and aren't required of facilities below 2.5 acres. And in addition, if it gets much bigger, even if you stay within that site class, and I chose totally arbitrarily 115%. Yeah, it says of the existing. In other words, if it grows by 15%, it would trigger a review. And I think that's a number that we should decide on. I just threw a number in there to have a number in there. I think we had some discussion about whether the power went up, whether we need to do anything. And my general feedback from emails was no, we would probably not have this clause in there. But let's talk about 5.2, 5.3, and 5 point question mark. And again, just shout out, because again, I can't see if someone's trying to speak.
Bill, somehow I lost your screen,
Oh,
but
does everybody else have my screen still?
the way that
Yeah.
what you just read was worded was referencing the 115% to whatever was there at that time. But I think it should be referenced to whatever was originally built, because if they did 2 expansions of 10% each time, you would want to catch it, but I'm not sure it would the way it's worded.
Okay, no, it's a good point. So, and what do other people think about that? Do we care if the facility creeps up by 10%, one year and then comes back 8 years later and goes another 10%? Is that something we care about? We might well, or we might not. So what do people think?
I think that's a good point. And, 15% from the original seems like a good thing to specify.
We
Yeah,
just changed
I
the word.
agree.
Okay. So if existing becomes original area, is that clear enough? Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Bill,
Yeah.
I get a little confused about the ability to expand an area if we're concerned about how topsoil is treated and things like that. How do you expand on land and still have the same obligations? Do you have the same obligations?
I'm not sure I fully follow you. I mean, I think that we're saying that, yes, that if you're going to expand, you can make a small change. You want to add 6 panels over here. So you just added a 1/4 acre to your 50-acre facility. That's not going to trigger a site plan review, because maybe you're going to really screw up that little bit of land, but it's not that big a deal. But if you're going to make a substantial change in your area, you have all the same obligations, or even maybe more so, depending if you change site class, than you had when you originally made the facility. And that's what I'm attempting to capture here. Does that clarify the intent? I may have misunderstood your question.
No, because all the things that you do during construction wouldn't apply. All your requirements during construction wouldn't apply, would they?
I'm trying to say they do apply if
if you're
get bigger.
worried.
Anyone
What
want to
about,
contribute here?
But only if you get bigger by more than,
15%, exactly. I'm saying
only
you
if you get bigger by more than 15%.
right.
Okay, so you're saying if you disturb more than 15% of 2.5 15 significant for protecting soil, or how you go about construction, or any of the concerns that you had for the original.
I lost part of you, but I also know that Jonathan
You
wanted
shouldn't
to say
have
something.
to. You shouldn't have to expand without. I don't see how you can do that.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm following you. 'Cause
Okay, I'll listen.
Yeah, it may be because of the things dropping out, but I mean, if you are building a new facility, you have to do the regulations in this law. And if you happen to have a facility, because again, you could build one under this law 2 years from now and come back 15 years from now wanting to expand the facility. And it's saying if you expand your facility by much, you're going to go through a whole new review. That's what I'm trying to set up. And it might be that you want 115% to be, basically any change in area. I'm not sure I'm fully hearing. Again, a lot of words are dropping out. I'm not trying to say that that a new facility doesn't get covered. So I'm a little, does anybody else get her point? Because I think I might be missing the point.
Bill, this is just sort of another aspect of this, but what about the decommissioning bonds and things? So if you expand it by 14%, do they need to put another 14% into whatever funds are set aside for decommissioning?
Good point. Let's take a look at that. I mean, the decommissioning thing is supposed to be reevaluated periodically to account for inflation, et cetera. And maybe then we need to add a phrase there saying, or site expansion or something. But when we get to that section, if we do, which is like 12 or 13, I think that's a great point to take a look at.
Bill, I know I'm not supposed to say anything, but
No, that's not quite true. You're allowed to say stuff.
is it 15 or 115?
Well, it's basically an increase of 15%. It says to 150% or more of the original area. So if you're expanding to be 115% of your original area, I read that as you got 15% bigger than you were. That's what I'm trying to say. And maybe my language isn't good in the law there.
I mean, however it's normally drafted in a law is fine with me, but I find that confusing.
Okay.
You're not really saying,
Maybe it should say increases by 15% of the original area. Is that?
yeah. I mean, it just sounds like a smaller number. So emotionally, it's like not that much. That's what I'm saying.
And again, I don't know if 15 is the right number. That's, you know, and Will's point might be it needs to be smaller, or that she's thinking we might be shooting ourselves in the foot and we're letting something slip through. And Will, you might need to write up a note on that, because I was definitely missing the point.
I think if you say of the originally
One
approved-
second.
Well,
area.
let Val finish first, Will. Go ahead, Val, what were you saying?
But I think if you say of the originally approved area of that facility, because it would then mean that original has to do with the last date of approval, rather than the idea that it's the last 15% or 14% increase that you're referring back to. I think maybe that's what was mentioned. In other words, it just sets it back to the last approval.
Yeah, and I understand.
Sorry. Is it okay to speak? Sorry.
Yeah, 1 second.
Stuff going
Give
on
me a
there.
second.
You have about
Okay, and we'll fix the of.
pandemonium breaks out.
Yeah. So again, I said plus
Okay.
you out here, but basically, I'm going to change this such that the originally approved area increases by 15% or more. The modification or expansion requires. Okay, is that Val? Doesn't have to deal with. Is that seem better, Val?
hmm
Okay, so Will, what did you want to say?
Okay, so I think where I run into a problem is you're talking about large solar energy systems
Medium or
in
large?
this provision, and then, right, okay, the medium ones I'm not so concerned with maybe, but the large ones can be really large, and 15% can be a lot of land, and
Mhm.
I don't see how you can be concerned in the original application about how that land is,
I think that's a good point. Whether
how
that should be-
construction will proceed, and
So I think that.
then not be concerned if they expand.
Okay, I am concerned in the original, but I think that your point is that maybe rather than a percent increase, it needs to be an acreage increase. I don't know, or it needs to be both. You have a trip that, because again, I've been a 2.5
Yeah.
acre facility expands by 15%. Well, in this case, it would trigger a whole new thing because they become a large one. But let's say a 2 acre place that wanted to get 50% bigger, that's not that much land. But if you have a 100 acre place that wants to get 50% bigger,
Right.
that is a lot of land. And this could have two thresholds, one which is an area increase and one that's an absolute level. I don't know. Maybe we need to think about it for the week. But I'll take some quick comment on whether we need to think differently about the threshold.
Yeah, just on that point, it would seem to me that it would be useful to think differently between medium and large. And and the 15% for medium seems appropriate, or at least not objectionable to me. But I wonder for large if it should either be any increase above the originally approved size would need to do this, or a 5% increase, or something small.
Okay. Anybody else?
I forgot, what was the number that we defined the large facility in terms of area?
Anything above 2.5 acres.
Right, so,
And again, once it reaches about 20 or 25 megawatts, which would likely be 2 to 250 acres, maybe even 150 acres, depending on technology, would go to the state for regulation, not us. So we're really talking anything between 2.5 to say a couple hundred acres.
because again,
But an
15%
increase
2.5
in
isn't
the,
Wait. Well, let Val finish speaking, then you can go.
sure,
Yeah, I was just saying that yeah, 15% of a 2.5 acre installation wouldn't be that much, but it would be of a 150 acre installation.
So it could be worded a certain percentage or certain acreage for a medium-sized facility and a small percentage, 5% increase for a large. I mean, you could say any change in a large facility. That would be one possible. Or you give them some amount of wiggle room of 5% or something. We'll want you to say what you were going to say, and then let's other people can voice opinions on different thresholds for the different sizes. You might be frozen, Will. I don't see your face moving. Okay.
so an increase might not go through the state. I just wanted to, I think that's what you suggested, but once the facility's built, an increase, certain reviews, but it might not go through the state.
Yeah, I think the point you made was that, let's say we had I mean, again, any community solar project, by the way, doesn't matter how big it is, if they gang together 5, 6, or 7 5-megawatt plants, is local jurisdiction. But there could be a commercial project that's not community solar that is, say, 20 megawatts that comes through local review, and then they expand a little bit. And I think what you're saying, Will, is that maybe they expand to 28 megawatts would they go through state review? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Now, what I'm saying is you might have a 25 megawatt plant, goes through state review, they increase by 15%. That 15% increase may not go through state review.
Okay,
That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
So
I
it's
get
all
that.
local.
I do not know the answer to that question either. I mean, I don't know what's in state law.
I'm pretty sure they.
So the state approves a project, that project can increase in size and the state never re-reviews them?
They're not necessarily obligated to. It goes through the utility. It has to go through the state.
Okay,
It all has to do with how they're already interconnected and
okay.
what their capacity is.
All right, I think in the end, we don't have to worry about that because we can't touch them anyway. So I expect if they went through state process to begin with, but I'm want to
Okay,
leave this
but
behind.
If you go,
I really want to leave this behind,
if
Will.
you go back to a different point, if you go back to the site plan review, I think there's already something that would touch off a review. Why not just stick to that?
I'm not following you again. If it's a big facility that's regulated by the state, we don't get to touch it under site plan review either. It's my understanding at least.
I'm talking about the increase.
Okay, so if it's 1 acre, you mean, or what? I'm not sure what you're saying then.
Yeah,
That could
Yeah.
be the number. I mean, basically the interaction between site plan and this law is still to be worked out. I started that process here, and I think that we are going to be looking at that. I think probably review board and site and planning board together, how to dovetail the two together. And yes, it could be that, but I still think that the sort of stuff that's in this law needs to apply, and we just have to figure out the threshold at which it applies.
Bill?
Yes.
So to Barb's point, is anyone opposed to just having it say any addition for the larger category? Because if not, we could just say any and move on.
Right.
Right. I think that's,
I don't object to that strongly, but I would have said, just make it small, you know, you don't want some maintenance change that if it's 100 acres and it now added a half an acre because it reorganized some things, you don't necessarily want.
So if they disturb less than an acre, maybe they should be okay.
Yeah,
Because again, 1 acre is the site plan threshold, as Will was referencing.
Right. I mean, just for perspective, like these are big. They're already big. So if there's
Right.
something that's already there, it's big. And so if they make a change, it's still not going to be nearly as big as what went in initially.
Okay, so it'll get some wording along the line of, for at least the large ones, any disturbance as long as it's under an acre. Does that satisfy everyone's, that's our compromise position?
Yes.
And then for the medium-sized ones, I don't still know if it's going to be a percent or what we want to do for medium-sized ones.
well, I think the percent is fine there.
Okay.
Would any medium size be over an acre but under 15%?
Let's see. I would have to do the math quickly, but no, I mean, because you had a no, it won't, right? If you had a 2 acre one, which is almost the biggest one you could be, and it went up by
Okay.
15%, you're adding a third of an acre.
Okay.
So
Just want
yeah,
to make sure we're consistent. Okay.
Right.
okay. All right. Okay. I do propose that we take out the increase in power. I have a question into the code officer though, because I mean, I think our fundamental question is, if something gets a lot more powerful, someone's got to make sure that it'll handle it. Now, I think it'll be in the company's best interest and it's in the utility's best interest to make sure that all electrical codes are safely satisfied. So, but I do want to make sure the code officer tells me what's going on in terms of if something that has been approved, that's a 7 megawatt facility, decides to become an 8 or 9 megawatt facility by putting more efficient panels in, who has to worry about that? Again, if it's not changing in size, I'm thinking it's not the town of Caroline. So that would be my suggestion, is to take out 5-point question mark. Comments? All right, not hearing.
I would agree. If we have the area, I think that's enough, because also I could imagine the idea, as I said before, that the efficiency of these things will probably increase considerably in the future. So
Yeah.
they may become more efficient without increasing area.
Yeah, I think they almost certainly will. Now, it may be that they decide to keep the same area and get more power out of it, and that's the most likely choice, but you know.
Right. The only
Not,
thing
not
would
if it means
be-
they have to upgrade the
might be the
power
battery.
lines again, you know. Okay, so we can at least get through section 5, I hope. I know that, you know, 7 o'clock or so is pumpkin hour. I don't want to keep people too late. The question of segmentation came up at the last meeting, so I added a no segmentation clause. You know, again, people either now or sometime can email me, but basically, you know, I don't think people, you know, applicants are going to segment very often, in the sense that if you're one developer, you want to put your stuff in one place because it's the most efficient. So I just want to make sure though, they don't try to do that. And so I do allow, there might be a developer that's got one they want in, Speedsville area and something they're going to put up near Sladeville Springs. And I think those could be considered two separate projects, and I'm okay with that. So that's why I worded this the way I did. That basically you can't segment it for avoiding review, since areas are consideration. You can't put two things side by side and split them up, or you can't say this year I'm doing this part and next year I'm doing that part, and those are two separate projects. That doesn't fly. So that's what I'm trying to say. They have to be discontiguous to be separate. Applicable codes. This is again language from the law about not having a clear line of sight to the sun. Will at one time asked whether people could waive their right to that. I think it certainly probably could, but this was language that guy signed off on at one time, so I don't know. And that's this. Yeah, you can't impede. Basically, we don't want to let people impede sunlight to an adjacent lot. But I suppose if you want to waive your right to that, and then the developer brings that to the review board, they probably have the ability to look the other way, or at least exempt them. We'll go back to that in a minute. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, the outstanding question has to do with if you are converting from if you did a non-grid tied system, then you're going to convert it. What has to happen? And we just look at anything else in here. No, I think that's the only two things. The possibility of a waiver clause, and what if you connect later? And that's probably the main thing that has to be discussed unless somebody else has another question. So in terms of this being converted, what do we want to say roughly? Final words don't have to be here. If you're becoming grid tied, you then basically go through this review process, as if from the start.
Yes, and unless there's specific, specific items that would have already been approved or checked out or, reviewed in some meaningful way, but I'm not sure what that would be other than what a code officer might tell us that they do.
I'm going to say, maybe the procedures as outlined and as laid out in this law or something. Something like that. They basically have to submit an application for review if they're going to tie in to the grid.
If they're going to tie in at all, or if it's going to be the size that would trigger a permitting.
So yeah, so I think if
it's not going to be big enough to matter.
Well, it says standalone that's being converted to grid tied requires review. So if it turns out they are 15 kilowatts, procedures, actually, yeah, review is wrong. They have to follow the procedures. So it doesn't require a review or permit by the review board because, again, for a size that small, they go to the code officer. So it has to require, must comport, must follow this law, something like that. In other words, I agree that if they're 15 kilowatts, they don't have to get a permit from the review board. They get a permit from the code officer. And if they're above 25 kilowatts, then they have to be reviewed by the review board and get a permit. And that's what the law lays out. All right. So then the other question is whether we put some explicit language in, say, on this one that's saying, unless such right is waived by, the adjacent owner of the adjacent lot. You want to add any waiver language?
If you do you have to consider a future owner if the lot is sold?
Mm-hmm.
My guess is with other things that it would transfer with the property. And when you buy the property, of course, that provision hope would be disclosed to you. But yeah, that's a good question. But I think that's how it would probably work.
So I'm not sure.
I don't know. It's really tricky because you can't do anything that would affect the drainage to any neighboring property, right? It has to, the water that comes onto the property has to exit in exactly the same way. And it's an interesting idea. I would imagine that theoretically that you shouldn't be able to change this too much. But if the neighbor wants to put in their own solar field in an area that's already been shaded. On the other hand, the thing is that any tree planting or fencing could even do the same thing. So.
Yeah, I agree that, in fact, it's hard for me to imagine what we're talking about except trees, the boundary growth, because we've limited the whole thing to 20 feet high at maximum. There are setbacks. It's hard to believe that 20-foot high panel is going to be shading the next lot in a significant way, but a borderline of trees that grows to be 50 feet tall might possibly do it. They probably wouldn't want them to ever get that big though, because they would be shading. But I think that's what this would apply to, or
Well, only if those trees were part of this, like the screening plan of the solar energy system, I suppose, right? I mean, because
Right.
obviously you could put a row of trees on the edge of your property if you want to,
Yeah. Did we include the row of trees in earlier parts of the definition of a solar energy system?
It does not, I don't think it says anything about screen plantings there.
Yeah. So no solar energy system or required screening.
Well, the thing is that the times that I've seen it, and typically it's in very hilly places, is that, and it's maybe impeding isn't the right word, but it has to do with the idea that you cause reflections and glare. So it's almost the opposite, that you get almost blinding light being redirected by glancing off some of these things for something that's uphill, for example, typically. But that's, I guess, not impeding. That's
Right, augmenting.
yeah.
Yeah, and that has to be handled in the visual impact assessment, I think. A good point, Val, though. One thing, the large solar facilities, there is a clause in our law that says they're supposed to use anti-reflective coatings. I don't know how effective those are, but they probably help somewhat. All right, so should we add, not add a waiver, but perhaps add this line about required screening?
Right.
Okay.
I guess, except how can I don't think anywhere do we ever talk about tree line planting and sunlight.
No, we talk about screening, screening plantings were designed to shield the system from view. I think we can throw it in and, I doubt it'll be a big problem. Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of activity in the
I
chat.
guess the big key here is the word unreasonably.
Yes.
So
That always,
attitude.
okay. All right. So we are a bit after 7. So I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. We're getting into the heart of the law. So please review that. A question. So because the current timetable is that in March is when the zoning commission is likely to kick into gear. Again, with luck, there'll be appointments made either at that first agenda meeting in March or at the town board business meeting. And I assume that the commission would then commence shortly thereafter, say by mid-March. So I'd love to finish this law before a lot of people get pulled in a different direction. Because my vision of this, by the way, is that the 3 members of the planning board who wind up serving on the zoning commission are absolved of all responsibility for further planning board work or attendance at official planning board meetings until said zoning commission work is either done or light enough that becomes feasible. Because I expect that's going to be a heavy enough lift that you don't need to do anything else. And again, my expectation is it might work well for the review board and the planning board members that are remaining to do some work together. on some of these laws. But all that being said, I hate to ask this again, but do we think we should have another interim meeting before our normal March meeting to get through the rest of the Texas law while we have a full committee still? Or do we hope that we can do that at the second Thursday in March and just leave it at that, when we'll also probably take up some battery stuff? So what are people's thoughts on that? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody. And I've not been listening to chat. I see there's supposed to be stuff there, but all right, I never get to see chat. So do we have a meeting 2 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now? I mean, definitely 4 weeks from now. Do we have another one in between?
Well, I'm always in favor of 4 weeks.
Well, I have, yeah. Well, I have the time. I'm in favor of really being thorough so that we really work it through.
So is that a yes vote for another meeting? Will?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes,
Other-
please.
All right, gotcha. Thank you. Other thoughts? Do we still have, no, we lost Barbara. Yeah, that's what happens when I can't see everybody. I don't know when, she probably told me she was leaving, but I didn't see it. So Michelle, I guess I need to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Michelle, can you hear me?
All right, yeah, I lost you for a second. My screen
Okay.
went blank. You know, it's a little difficult for me right now to do it every 2 weeks, but I guess if the consensus is to do 2 weeks, I'll do it. So,
I gotta put you down as a maybe. Right now, there's no consensus.
yeah,
And basically, it would be Barb, is the other person I need to poll. So, and she's not here. So I will have to see, because right now
Well,
it's kind of,
Okay, I would say
Okay.
no then.
Yeah.
So you can have me as a no, and then
yeah, no, I have you as a no. I have you as a no. I have Michelle as a maybe and Will as a yes. And, you know, it's also possible, you know, that a subset can meet 2 weeks from now. Those at the time can do it, at least to make some headway on it. And then if there's any unresolved questions, that's handled by the full group a month from now. And that's probably what I will, now that I've brilliantly come to that idea, probably what I will propose. I'm not
that's
going
a good idea. I think it's a
Yeah.
good idea.
Yeah, so it'll essentially be an unofficial subcommittee. Will meet in 2 weeks, and the full planning board will meet in March, and that may be our last full planning board meeting, assuming the zoning commission stuff goes as hoped for.
Can I quietly make one more suggestion coming from the comprehensive plan, which is if there's sections that people want to work on in between, would that make the process a little more efficient, regardless of whether you meet in 2 weeks or 4 weeks? It's, you know, Zoom, I think, makes it really hard to really edit things. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, and so, yeah, and you know, so thank you, Catherine. Again, it is a Google Doc, and, you know, so I think it's fine. You know, when I made some dramatic changes, that's why I made a new draft, you know, you can say suggest, and, you know, I'm not that great at Google Doc, but you can say, well, I suggest this change, and it'll highlight it in a certain way. So you can try that kind of stuff. If you know, I think, yes, it's a Google Doc. It's there's an interactive document available for everyone to touch.
I guess I'm suggesting that
So-
people touch specific sections of it.
Yes, yeah, and that's fine. So I think the battery section is definitely Will's, right? She's sort of spoken up for that. And I don't know if we want to divvy up the other stuff that's in there is the decommissioning section, and then it's the medium and large section. And we have not gotten to the big question, which is whether we tried to have some land cover areas that we're less strict about. You guys all got my musings on that. So those are all big questions. So sure. Does anybody else want to particularly take, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, the medium and large are sort of work in concert, but I've done my bit, I must say. I'm not sure there's much more I can contribute to the document at this point. But I think Catherine's wondering about whether someone wants to speak for a particular section to go through. Yeah, Michelle.
I guess what's the purpose? What would be the purpose of this? Because it seems like Bill's put out this draft and now everybody's weighing in. So I guess I'm not clear what would be happening by breaking off sections for people. Because if I broke off a section, to be honest, I'd probably say, yeah, that sounds good. But then somebody else is going to say, no, what about that 5%? What about that, whatever, things that I don't even think about. So I think it still needs to be, gone over by the whole group to get new ideas.
I mean, the way it worked with the comp plan is that we divvied up sections and then got together and talked about them. But I agree that we may be far enough along that, again, the battery stuff is totally different and new and open. So I think it makes sense to lop that off. And if someone is willing to work on it, and Will has them, and Will, I can definitely help, like I said, that maybe makes sense. And the rest is something that it's already at a state where it needs committee discussion rather than individual discussion. So I think that's a good point. Okay, well, we've lost all the, other than Cal, who's kind of there. I think
Still
that,
there.
yeah, and Mark's still here. So I'm going to say the meeting is over. Thank you all. That's the end of the planning board meeting. I will again hang for a few more minutes if anyone wants to chat, either a planning board member or somebody else, if they want to chat about anything, coming on the meeting or thoughts or what they want to work on, that is fine.